folks about what's going on out here, and there's some amazing things happening. Right now we have with us Wayne Hubert.
That's right.
Wayne, how you doing today?
Just fine.
I guess you're the goose expert.
Well, yes. I guess I'm the goose expert. I am for this morning, yes.
Now, yesterday was the first chance I had to walk inside that. That is a big airplane. The wingspan, is it the largest wingspan of any aircraft?
It's the largest wingspan of any aircraft ever made. It's 320 feet. The way to think about it is if you put it on a football field, the wings go over both goalposts.
That's a big airplane. And you really get an idea about the size of it when you walk inside the building here, and it's simply dwarfed by all the other airplanes are just around it like little kids.
It is so large, it's very hard to visualize. When you think of the football field, it's the tallest airplane in the world, too, at the top of the tail. The only other one that matches it is the 747, like the one we have in our front yard out here.
Yeah.
Both of them are at 80 feet, but it's the tallest and the widest. It's not the longest.
So we're going to be talking to Wayne Moore here in just a moment, as well as some of the other, they call them docents. Now, what is a docent?
Docent is a French word for teacher.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we are. We try to teach our guests what it is we have in here and the importance and some of the stories that go along with all the things we're exhibiting.
Now, one of the reasons, now, by the way, we're going to be out and about doing more live broadcasts like we are now. We're also going to be adding video to it. And what we've already asked the people here if we could do a live show from inside the Spruce Goose. And we've been given permission to do that, so we'll be doing that fairly soon. And we'll be shooting video on that. And so when we're inside the Goose, and also tomorrow when we're here, you'll be able to go to our website and actually watch while we're talking at KLYC.us. We don't have the video up this morning. Right now it's just the radio broadcast, which is great. And we do want to thank you guys for allowing us to come out and share with what's going on in the museum. But one of the reasons we wanted to specifically come out to the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum is because of all the press that the for-profit company has received about the future and filing bankruptcy and so on and so forth. And we're not here to talk about that, but what we are here as a radio station is to support the museum and to support the mission of the museum, which is education. And we also strongly support our veterans. Are you a veteran, Wayne?
I am. I spent 4 years in the Navy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So there's a lot of things that happen out here at the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum that we very much support. We want to see the museum continue as strong and maybe even bigger in the future. When you come around and look at these aircraft, some of these aircraft are historic. And we're going to be talking about some of those aircraft, but definitely one that dwarfs everything else is the Spruce Goose. And we're going to be talking to Wayne here more in just a few moments on KLYC about the Goose. So Wayne, thank you for being with us on the show today.
Thank you for coming.
AM 1260 KLYC, and more to come here on the morning show. AM 1260 KLYC.
Close your eyes.
AM 1260 KLYC, and a very good morning. Dave Adams with you. We're broadcasting live from the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum. If you're like me, I love airplanes. Especially, I have kind of a love affair with the P-51 Mustang. Is there a Mustang out here somewhere?
There is in the other building, yes. Okay. We have P-51.
Love that airplane. A very sexy aircraft, and turned the tail in World War II, and we'll be talking about that maybe today if you have a docent here talking about that. Let's talk about the Spruce Goose.
Sure.
And Wayne Hubert is a docent out here at the Evergreen Aviation Museum, and right in front of me is the Spruce Goose. It has the widest wingspan of any airplane made.
320 feet.
So this airplane was designed to be what?
This airplane was designed to haul troops to Europe during the war. In 1942, the submarines were sinking all of our troop ships. And so Winston Churchill came up with the idea of building a big airplane to carry troops to Europe to fight the war. Well, he told this to FDR. FDR went to Congress. Congress let out a contract to build an airplane big enough to hold 750 troops, fly them to the war, land them in the ocean, come back and get some more. That way we'd fly over the submarines. Problem was the plane wasn't completed till 1947. By that time we had sunk all the submarines and the war was over.
Could it have done the mission?
all the engineering we can find says it could. Even to this day, we're still going through boxes of engineering pieces that we have in the archives, trying to find more and more information. Possibly, maybe, who knows, maybe somebody will put it on a computer someday and test it again. But it made the flight, got off the water 25 to 75 feet. There's two different arguments. By doing that, he completed the contract with the government.
Was he paid for the plane? Did he get...
The government put $18 million towards the cost of the plane. Mr. Hughes put in a lot more money in addition to that. The airplane by itself cost about $25 million to build. Now, those are dollars in 1942 to 47. It would be much more than that today.
Now, this plane is made entirely of wood.
94% wood. 94%. There's a lot of things that had to be metal. The engines, the fuel lines, hydraulic lines, gas tanks, that type of thing. 94% wood.
It's not spruce.
1% of it's spruce. 94% of the wood in the airplane is actually yellow birch.
How did it... Now, you had to disassemble it, bring it up here, and reassemble it? Is that
right.
Correct?
Uh-huh.
How long did that process take?
Well, actually, we started disassembling it in August of '92, and it got to Portland a couple of months later. It sat in the river. It sat in the river downtown Portland, waiting for the water to get just right, so we could get it through the locks at Oregon City. We got it within 8 miles of here on the water, and then we brought it in by trailer. We had to take the tail off and both wings, and it was brought up on a large barge up the ocean, down the Columbia, down the Willamette, and to where its final resting place was here.
Now, the wings and the tail are attached by screws, nails, rivets, what?
The airplane basically is glued together, okay? Now, when the individual pieces were taken off, there's many bolts involved, metal bolts and large fasteners to hold everything together. But remember that that's one of the few places you'll find metal in the airplane.
A lot of people think that this plane couldn't fly because its initial flight, it only flew 70, maybe 75 feet in the air. So I guess my assumption, as well as everybody else's assumption, is that it simply was too big to fly. But you're telling me that its mission was to carry 750 troops over to Europe, and conceivably it could have done that. Why didn't they ever fly it higher than 75 feet?
First of all, he didn't have a permit to fly the airplane. He had a permit to taxi only. He knew he was going to fly it. We have proof in the airplane that goes. I'd have to give you a long story to give it to you, but we had proof that he was going to fly it the day he finally flew it. When he did fly it, he was in the harbor at Long Beach. If he had flown it any farther than the 1 mile he flew it, he would have been over the breakwater into the open ocean. He did not want to land the plane the first time in the open ocean, so he took it up, he flew it, and he landed it. And by doing that, he completed the contract with the government. At the time, he was involved in hearings with the government over not completing wartime contracts. There's a lot more to that story too, but basically that was it. So he came back and he flew the airplane 1 mile, completing the contract.
Amazing airplane.
Yes, amazing airplane.
So you know a lot about that. What's the most amazing fact that you know of the airplane that people may not be aware of? Spruce Goose.
Well, I like to think of the Spruce Goose as kind of the place where large aircraft engineering was born. Okay, this is the first airplane to ever have a hydraulic assist between the pilot and the movable parts. They actually had to put in hydraulic systems to help move the cables back and forth. Mr. Hughes had OCD, a man that washes his hands 25 times, can't get them clean. He put in 5 hydraulic systems rather than just 1, in case the first 4 didn't work. And even to this day, the 747 out there has 3 hydraulic systems. The repetitiveness in this airplane carried through on all of our larger planes. Plus the engineering we discovered in the larger planes was very helpful as time went by.
So this was groundbreaking in a lot of ways.
Oh, very, very groundbreaking. One of the largest passenger planes in the world at that time, with this DC-3 sitting over here by the garage door, was the largest passenger plane at the time. At the time that went on the drawing boards.
And of course this dwarfs the DC-3.
Oh, but by 10 times, yes. It's
amazing airplane. So what is the cost to come out to go through the museum and see the Goose?
It costs about $25 per person, and this allows you into both museums, and it allows you to see a movie in our film area, and Then once up on the Goose, we have a controlled tour to get up on the flight deck. There's a $25 fee for 4 adults, and we send you home with a picture sitting in the cockpit.
Alrighty.
Mm-hmm.
Wayne, what would you like people to know about the Goose?
I just like people to know that it's here, and the fact that people can come in and look at it, be amazed, and walk away with some fun stories. The docents all have quite a few historic stories that are very entertaining, and it's well worth the funds that costs to get in here, and the funds support the museum. That's what we're trying to do.
Now, folks, if you have a question about that you'd like me to ask one of the docents here, you can send me an email to dave@klYC.us, dave@klYC.us. Now, the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum, they have 150 exhibits between aircraft and spacecraft, more than 300 volunteers, and it's about 3.5 miles southeast of McMinnville, Oregon, on Highway 18 across from the municipal airport. Wayne, how many people come out here and visit the museum on a annual basis or a monthly basis?
You know, I can't give you those numbers because I'm in the business of telling stories about the things that are inside the museum. I can tell you in the summertime, we have appointments about every 15 to take people up on the flight deck to take their picture and to show them what's up there. So there are times when we have hundreds of people in here in any one given day. And then in the wintertime, like today, when we have a cloudy, stormy day, it'll be much slower. And it runs at a very much slower pace. You might ask one of our supervisors here for actual numbers. They are very large, though.
How far do people come to see this airplane? They come from all over the world?
Oh, all over the world. All over the world. We have people that come in here who don't even speak the language. We actually have to help people that don't speak the language. We have people come in here that are sightless. We have a model of the spruce goose over here that we actually let them feel to show the story.
Some of the comments, what do people say?
Well, usually they're just so amazed that it's so big. But we get a lot of humorous stories too. Some people want to know if it's a replica instead of the real thing. There's a lot of real funny stories, but the fun thing of being a docent is we meet so many people that are involved personally with the airplane. I've met many people over the last 5 years that either worked with the airplane, saw it fly, had relatives that worked with the airplane, or people that knew Mr. Hughes, that type of thing. Fascinating fun.
Would you like to fly it? Are you a pilot?
I'm not, but my son flies for United.
Oh.
No, I'm not. But
do you think this plane will ever fly again?
No, it'll never fly again for about 1,500 different reasons. But one of them is you can't get it out of the building without tearing the building down. Right. But no, it won't fly again. We would love to have somebody with the capability and permission from our bosses to allow us to put it on a computer to see if the computer would prove that it does fly. Oh, that's just a dream in the back of my mind.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Wayne, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
KLYC AM 1260. We are broadcasting live from the Evergreen Aviation Museum. We're going to be talking to some more of the docents about some of the other planes that we have out here. Quite a history lesson to be had out here at Evergreen. More to come. This is KLYC. We are on location. Glad to have you with us today, and more to come. Stay with us. Riding the downtown train, it's Rod Stewart. AM 1260 KLYC, Dave Adams, and we are broadcasting live and direct from the Evergreen Aviation Museum. I'm looking at the big gray spruce goose, the airplane with the largest wingspan of any aircraft ever built, and it's an amazing thing. You need to come out and see it. Right now we're talking to Laurel Adams. Now, Laurel is a captain out here at Evergreen, at least the Aviation and Space Museum. Laurel, welcome to KLYC.
What's that?
Welcome to KLYC.
Thank you very much.
So what is a captain?
Well, a captain, each of the 7 days has a day captain that's kind of the chairman of that group and is in charge of it, and that I'm one of them on Wednesday.
Now, you've got a unique perspective because you've been here since the beginning, correct?
Not quite the beginning. I've been here for about 17 years, but before this building was built, and we were across the street in the back room of one of the buildings over there. So, yeah.
You've seen a tremendous growth in that time.
Yes, right. It sure has. We I don't exactly know how many airplanes belong to the museum then, but we had 6 of them in that back room on one of the buildings across the street. That was our museum at the time. So
It's got to be tremendously satisfying to you to see it grow from a dream to where it is today with all these historic aircraft here.
very much so, yes. It's been very, very exciting. And like I say, I was about number 4 on the volunteer list, and now we have 316 or 18 volunteers now, so that has grown as well.
Why do we need a facility like the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum?
Oh, good question. I think it's good for the community. I think it brings people in, brings people downtown if they come in, and so it's a very, very good addition. And it also opens up much about the aircraft industry, about different airplanes. People can come out here and see World War I, World War II, Vietnam era, and everything in the aircraft, and that they hear about, they can see them out here. So I think it's a very, very good for the McMinnville community.
One of the things that has been said to me, and quite frankly, I agree with it, is history. And I'm not trying to make a political statement here, but sometimes I don't think our kids are taught enough history with regards to World War II in school today. So, folks, I would invite you to bring your kids out here, and whether or not you agree with war or whatever, there are times that we have to fight for the cause of freedom. And there's quite a few. For example, the B-17. There's a
Yes.
B-17 bomber here that was used in World War II. A lot of men died in the air war over Europe in that airplane. And there's something about just climbing aboard and just walking through there and realizing that you're walking through history, and that that men had to fly over Europe and fight a battle in this airplane that you're standing in. And there's just something where it just makes history come alive. That's one of the things I like about the museum.
Yes, and I use the B-17 in talking with visitors quite often, because particularly if they happen to have like teenagers with them or something. And of course, you call those people men. There were a lot of teenagers,
Yeah.
18, 19, 20. Some of the pilots were only 22, so they were kids, and they would get in those airplanes, fly at 30 to 40,000 feet, get shot at by aircraft, by airplanes, drop the bombs, make it back to England, then get up in several days later and do it all over again. And they do it about 25 times before they could come home. And of course, the 8th Air Force that flew out of England had one of the highest casualty rates of any unit in the U.S. military at the time because of that. So yes, it is history.
I heard a statistic yesterday that a typical aircrew would fly 8 missions before they were shot down on average.
I don't know about that, but that probably is pretty close. Yeah, not all of them did get shot down, of course. We have a fellow here that used to work here. He doesn't come out much anymore, but he flew 35 missions in a B-17 in World War II. So
That's incredible. Well, one of the nice things it's about flight here, and you're seeing airplanes from just the early on airplanes. There's even a replica of the Spirit of St. Louis here.
of the which?
Spirit of St. Louis.
Yes, yes.
Charles Lindbergh flew that. And then you go on up to the first jet fighter ever flew by any government. It was flown by the Germans. The 262, Messerschmitt 262. There's a replica of that here.
Yes, that was the first. I think the British had a jet in operation. We were doing. We did have a jet show up at the very tail end of World War II, but we didn't really have a lot of them. And we have one of those here, and they called them P then because Pursuit, and the P-80, that was, I believe that was the right number. I hope someone listening can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that was one of the first jets that we had.
What would you tell people to motivate them to come out here to visit the museum?
I think we've touched on what I would tell them this morning a couple of different times, and that would be that they can see things that you see on the movies, in the history, read about in the history books in terms of the air war, particularly World War II. And so they can see those, they can be told about how they operated, how effective or ineffective they may have been in the air. And I think if they're interested in airplanes, this is a place that they have got to come to.
What kinds of comments do you hear from people that come and visit?
Very positive. A few we get that aren't, that are upset about something. But generally, people just, we go through the comment, we have a place that people can put a comment on it. And we get this marvelous, great, best thing I ever saw. It beats the Smithsonian. We get that a lot, too. So I don't quite agree with that, but I think we come real close.
I think you do, too. What is the craziest question you've ever been asked by a visitor?
Oh, my goodness. You put me on the spot here. I think a story, maybe not quite answering your question, but we had a lady come in one day and come up to the front counter and want to know the directions to the beach, to the ocean. And we told her just stay on 18 and keep going. And she said, thank you very much, and started to leave and looked up. And, of course, when you're at the front desk, you're under the wing of the Spruce Goose or the H-4 or the HK-1, whatever you call it. And she said, by golly, what is that? And we told her, and she said, my husband has to come in. So she went out and got her husband, and they came in and spent a goodly time here because they didn't know it was here. The questions we get a lot is, what's it doing here? Why isn't it in Portland? Or why isn't it still in California? And so forth. Those kind of come out. And we had another incident where somebody came in, paid, and then said, now which building is the Spruce Goose in? And we said, well, it's right there. And they looked up, and it does look like a gray wall at times. It's so big.
It's an amazing aircraft. So folks, come on out. What are your hours?
We're open at 9 in the morning, and we're open till 5 at night. And we're only closed 3 days a year. That's Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter.
Is there an organization, or if people want to volunteer, or maybe they want to financially support the museum or otherwise support it with volunteer time or whatever, how do they get plugged in?
Well, volunteers can come into the museum and get an application, or they can go online, Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum, and go online and get a application and mail it in or send it in, and or bring it back if they're living close by. And of course, if you're going to volunteer, you certainly would probably want to be living close by. And if there's money, if they're interested in donating, they can approach the girls on the front desk in either building, and they can be directed to whomever they do.
All right. Laurel, thank you very much for all the work you've done. Thanks for sticking with it since the beginning and being a part of the crew that has made this come to the life it is today.
Yeah. And I would thank you for opening up our radio station again in McMinnville.
Well, thank you very much.
I've lived here all my life, and I'm glad to have it back. So.
Well, thank you. There's one of the things we plan on doing with the radio station is doing more of what we're doing today.
Yeah.
Getting out in the community, doing live broadcasts from, in fact, I'm excited about doing a broadcast from inside the Goose.
Yeah.
And when we're doing that, we're going to be streaming live video. So, folks, you can listen to it on the radio and then go to your smartphone or your computer, and you can watch and see what it looks like as we're talking about it,
right.
which I think is kind of exciting.
Okay.
More to come in 2014.
Yeah.
Laurel, thank you for being with us today.
Okay. Appreciate it.
AM 1260 KLYC. We're going to get back to the music right now. And the OJ's I Love Music, and I love the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum. More to come from here. AM 1260 KLYC. I'm Dave, and departing a little bit from our usual format here today, we're going to do it as tomorrow as well, from 9 to 10 a.m. these 2 days. Out here at the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum, just tell you what's going on. Today we're in the aviation section of the museum, right in front of the Spruce Goose. And just want to tell you what's happening, what's on display here. Charles Richards is a lieutenant here with the docents. Docent is French word for teacher.
Yes.
And you're a volunteer that helps explain the history and the story of a lot of these aircraft. Now, I understand Charles' expertise is two airplanes, World War II fighters specifically, and individually, the P-40 Warhawk and the P-51 Mustang.
Yes.
Now, and like many other folks, I have a real soft spot in my heart for the P-51 Mustang. That was a game changer in World War II, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was the finally our bombers who had been taking terrible hits were going to be covered with fighter cover because the B-17 was supposedly able to handle itself and protect itself, but the Luftwaffe soon proved that that was not true at all, and we lost thousands and thousands of men and hundreds of airplanes.
Now, the crew of 10 is what flies the B-17. So every
That's
time
right.
one B-17 went down, 10 guys
Right.
went down with that airplane.
The first 2.5 years of the war, if you sent out 100 airplanes, 36 would not come back. So that meant you put 360 men either killed or in a concentration camp somewhere.
So that's terrible. So they had to have a long-range fighter. And the P-51 is a story in itself because when it first came out, it was a dog.
Yes, the plane was actually developed for the British. The British had two really good fighters. They had the Spitfire, and they had the Mosquito, which was a wood airplane that was the fastest plane in the war right then. And they needed one more plane, and so they came to a company called North American Aviation in the United States and asked them to build the plane. They gave them 180 days to build the plane, and they actually built it in 108 days. And it was taken to Europe, and they did the test on it, and it was carrying an engine called the Allison, which was inline engine and pretty old style, and it just was a dog. It really didn't fly well. And so they put it on the ground and waited a few weeks, and a British officer walked by the airplane. And if you've ever seen a P-51, it has a big long nose on it. He said that he looks like that would hold the Merlin Rolls-Royce engine that was the one they were using for the Spit. And they put the engine in the airplane, and it made it the perfect fighter. So once that got started, of course, we wanted some too. The problem was Rolls-Royce was already making all the engines they could. So they came to the United States, and they had talked to the Packard Motor Company, who had made automobiles for years, but during the war you didn't make private cars, so they gave them the license to build these engines, and so the Packard engines, Packard Merlins, were put into our planes, and they started flooding Europe. And as soon as they got over there, it was over for the Luftwaffe. There were just too many of them, and they were too good.
So your expertise is fighter aircraft World War II.
Right.
Compare the Spitfire with the P-51 Mustang.
They're very close. In fact, when I get people here at the museum from Great Britain, I have a running battle all the time of which one is the best. But basically, the Spit was not as heavily armed, and it was a great airplane. But the Mustang was a real tough bird, and it could take a lot of damage and still do tremendous amount of damage. And it was very heavily armed. The planes were set up to protect the pilot and make them really a player in the field.
Now, the one drawback for the P-51 Mustang was it was a liquid-cooled engine.
Right.
It wasn't air-cooled. So if you took a hit and you lost your cooling system on a P-51, you
had
trouble.
90 seconds before the engine seized up. That was the people who didn't like it, especially the people who liked the P-38s, the twin boom plane. In them, they had the old style engines, and they were air cooled, and so there was a constant battle going on. But yes, they were. But the performance is what made it so good, because that engine, the Merlin, was just a perfect engine for those planes.
Amazing story, P-51. Now, the P-40 Warhawk, tell us about that.
Well, amazingly, it was built by the Wright Curtiss Company, who had started, of course, with the Wright brothers. And the planes were actually made, and they came under 3 different names, depending on who was flying them. If we flew them during most of the war, they were called the Warhawk. And if you were in Great Britain flying them, or at a British protectorate, then they were called the Tomahawk. And at the end of the war, they all got put together, and it became the the Warhawk, Tomahawk, going more. I can't think of it right now, but it had one other name. Oh, the Kitty Hawk. They were the Kitty Hawk at the end of the war.
Interesting story. You have how many airplanes are in this building now? We're in the aviation building.
About 70.
70 airplanes in this, all the way from a replica of the Spirit of St. Louis.
Right.
Now, the real Spirit of St. Louis is, I think, it's the Smithsonian.
Was that?
The genuine, the real Spirit of St. Louis is in the Smithsonian.
It's in St. Louis, right. Ours was made up in Washington State. It's an exact duplicate made from the original plans. So I've seen the one, it's in Washington in the mall, and they look identical. The only difference is the lacquer on the one at the Smithsonian is turned gold because of the age of it, and but you can't tell them apart. If you saw them together, they look exactly the same.
How long have you been a docent or a volunteer here?
4 years.
4 years. What do you like about it?
Everything. I'm an airplane freak. The reason I came here to begin with was I have an uncle that flew for the 8th Air Force during World War II. He was a pilot on a B-17, so in my family, he was always the big hero, and everybody always talked about the things he had done during the war.
How many missions did he fly?
31.
Flew 31 missions and survived. That's unusual.
Yeah, he is. In fact, he passed away 2 years ago. He was 95 when he passed away. In the last 2 years of his life, he actually wanted to go to the best place he ever hit, and that was down in Texas at where Lackland Air Force Base is, because he said that was where he had felt like he was most alive and really became a man down there. So that's where he liked.
What would you tell people to motivate them to come out here to the museum?
Well, so many places you go now are staged. I think to see the real airplanes and know that exactly the things that did these many things we've heard so much about, I think is very, very special. When you walk up inside the Spruce Goose, you realize that is a real piece of history. Not very often do people get to go into that, and people are allowed sometimes to even go up in the cockpit of the Spruce Goose. And I've had pilots actually break down in tears when they get up there because it's so special to the whole story of the history of aviation.
It's an amazing airplane. It is one big airplane.
Yes, it is. Its wingspan on it is 321 feet, so that's a football field with 10 feet on each side.
You got folks. If you've never been out here, and to be quite honest, I've been over in the Space Museum a lot. There's been veterans events over there, and there was the Living History Week, and so on and so forth. But yesterday was the first time, admittedly, I was over in the aviation side, and yesterday was the first time I've been inside the Spruce Goose, and that is amazing. It's incredible. You folks, you got to come out and take a look at it.
I firmly enjoy it, and I love to be here because I love nothing better than to show people around and explain some history that people just take for granted and don't really know always.
It's one thing about reading the history in the history books. It's another thing about climbing up inside the Spruce Goose or walking down the catwalk in a B-17
exactly.
And looking out the window and taking the machine gun in your hand and realizing that, there was a lot of young men that were in this same situation, this same kind of aircraft that died fighting for freedom in the air war in Europe.
Yes. Actually, most people don't realize it, but there were actually more people lost in these airplanes than Marines killed in the war.
I understand that. They told me yesterday, was it 250,000?
Yes.
250,000 young men died in the B-17.
Right, and the day that we went into Normandy, no one had been on the continent for 3.5, 4 years. There were 17,000 people in Luftwaffe prisons in Germany on that day. So I mean, it was a massive thing on a scale that it's hard to understand.
250,000 people died in that airplane, and so talking about history coming alive, and just realizing, wow, I'm standing in something. I like history. I like airplanes. And so this is a great place to come and really feel history.
Yes, it is.
Charles Richards, he is a lieutenant here in the docents with the Evergreen Aviation Museum, and his expertise is fighter aircraft, specifically P-40 Warhawk and the P-51 Mustang.
Thank you much.
Thank you for all you do. AM 1260 KLYC, more to come. We'll be here until 10 o'clock this morning, and we'll probably have time for one more guest, and we'll do that here in just a moment. This is AM 1260 KLYC, and more to come. Thank you.
This is Gary with Christensen Auto Sales, McMinnville's newest used car dealer, located out here on Highway 99 next to Cascade Steel. We offer a large selection of quality pre-owned vehicles.
AM 1260 KLYC, Fleetwood Mac and Dave Adams, and we are here at the Evergreen Aviation Museum, and we are here with Jim Tier, who is a docent, volunteer, is going to teaching us a little bit about the B-17 Flying Fortress. We were talking about that a little bit. Jim, welcome to the microphones of KLYC.
Thank you very much.
B-17, game changer, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What was so special about that airplane?
It was able to missions into Germany, deliver its bombs, and protect itself with the gun crews on board the aircraft without escort in the early days of the war.
That was significant.
Very significant because the fighters at the beginning of the war could only escort them across the channel and then have to return to England, and they could continue on their own. 13 50 caliber machine guns flying in type formation, protecting themselves against the attacks of the fighters.
It's called the Flying Fortress. The thing that I didn't find out until yesterday was that 250,000 men died flying that airplane.
A lot of men died. I don't have an exact number, but I can tell you of the 12,000 or so aircraft built, the first 2 years of the war, they lost half of them.
Wow. So the bomber losses over Europe were staggering.
They had the flak, the anti-aircraft fire from the ground, and the fighters attacking these planes, and a lot were lost.
Can you imagine being assigned to a B-17 Flying Fortress and realizing that the chances were real good you were either going to die or get shot down?
I can imagine that, and I can think about it. My father-in-law had a lot of stories. He told me he was a pilot during World War II, flew a B-25. And the interesting thing, and the thing I like to convey to the young people, is these men and women were driven to do this job. A lot of them were shot down, and their first thought was to get back to England, get back in a plane, and make another mission.
One of the things that I like about the World War II are you a veteran?
I am a veteran, yes. I served in the U.S. Air Force in the Vietnam era.
One of the things that I like specifically, the World War II veteran is described as the world's greatest generation. And many, if not all, most, to the vast extent, most of the World War II veterans that I run into are very humble. They're servants, and it's just an amazing generation of people that stepped up to fight the battle.
That's exactly my experience with the men I have met. They're hesitant to even identify themselves as veterans when they come to look at the plane. Frequently, they stand back. We can pick them out. They will stand back 20 or 30 feet. They won't say anything, and they'll just look at the plane. And from time to time, I'll walk over and introduce myself and receive an interesting story from them.
Maybe they've been flying in one of those planes.
Yes, I've had that happen. I have had that happen.
Talk to me about the B-17, the Flying Fortress. There is one on display here at the Evergreen Aviation Museum. Interesting facts about the plane.
Our plane is a G model, the last version of the B-17 built. Ours was built in 1945, near the end of the war. In its current condition, it's almost exactly as built. The bomb sights, the guns, and the interior of the airplane and the exterior of the airplane look like it just came out of the factory. It has a little bit of radio equipment in it, very insignificant, because it is a flyable aircraft.
Could you start, are all the pieces there to fly it again?
Everything is there to fly this plane. It's been in the museum for about 10 years. Prior to bringing it into the museum, it was flying. Mr. Smith used it in the area to fly, and it was brought in. It still has drip trays under it and fluids in the aircraft. With the appropriate service and inspection, I'm sure it could be made flyable again.
Interesting airplane. What do you like about being a docent out here, a volunteer?
I enjoy meeting people and telling the history and the story of this great generation that flew these planes, and some of the newer planes too. But during that period of time, there was a tremendous amount of development that went on that goes into modern aircraft, and we can convey the link between what happened then and today, and the history of these people that made these significant contributions.
It's not to be understated. Yeah, they essentially saved the world.
I think so. And they didn't, like you said, very selfless, made their contributions because they felt they had a duty to do it and expected very little in return.
And I did not live during the era of Pearl Harbor and World War II, but we had a little bit of a taste about what it might have felt like during 9/11 when our country was attacked, and there's just a patriotism that came, I never saw so many American flags flying as I did after 9/11. And so the country just united and came together. I can imagine what was happening after they saw all these pictures of all these battleships sinking and burning in Pearl Harbor, that it just galvanized a nation. I think it's the movie Tora Tora Tora, and I don't know if this is dramatic license, but one of the Japanese generals was quoted in the movie about, "I fear that all we have done is awaken a sleeping giant." And that's essentially what happened. But a lot of men died in that war.
The interesting part, when you look at these things, the whole country was galvanized together. The engines on this aircraft of ours, some are made by Wright Corporation. We have one on display that is built by Studebaker Corporation. Those designs and patents were shared by whoever could build them. They needed engines. Studebaker had the capabilities, so the Boeing or the Wright engineers would go there, assist them, and they would build the engines. So they're exact identicals. Some say Wright, some say Studebaker, but they're all used on that aircraft, and a lot of the components were the same way. This B-17 that we have could have been built at the Boeing field, could have been built at Long Beach by Douglas under Boeing supervision. The planes were identical, and you can't tell them apart. They were sharing these construction things throughout the country, and the whole country had a single mission.
To win the war.
To win the war.
And that they did. And if you want to see how they did it, or at least some of the tools that were used in either winning the war or just in flight, amazing facility you have out here at the Evergreen Aviation Museum. Tomorrow we're going to be at the Space Museum, and then very soon we need to talk to the folks out here. We're going to be doing a show from inside the flight deck of the Spruce Goose, just like we're talking here, but we're going to be streaming that with live video, so you can come in and watch, go to our website and see what it looks like inside the cockpit of the Goose.
That'll be fun. I hope also that people will take the opportunity to come by the B-17. One of my primary jobs now is to take people through a small historic visit to the outside, and then I actually take them inside the plane. I show them the guns, the waist gunners, the ball turrets, the radio compartment, the bomb bay, and how the inside of the aircraft function. It's a real interesting time capsule to step inside this aircraft and see what it was like for these men who were flying at 25,000 feet in sub-zero conditions with oxygen masks, freezing cold, operating these aircraft.
It's amazing. And when you hear the name Flying Fortress, you almost imagine something like the Spruce Goose, but when you go inside the Flying Fortress, it's smaller than I thought it would be.
It looks big on the outside, and frequently people will say, boy, it seems so small in here. With 10 men inside this aircraft, it does seem small. They worked in very close quarters together in very difficult conditions.
And they won the war. Well, Jim, thank you for being with us today.
It was a pleasure.
Here again. Again, folks, tomorrow we're going to be here broadcasting live from the Space Museum. And we'll tell you what's going on over there, and then be listening for details about what we're going to be doing our Spruce Goose broadcast here on AM 1260 KLYC.